What if I told you there's something inside you that doesn't belong to this world? Something older than matter itself, deeper than biological DNA, and placed in humanity even before the fall of Eden? The ancients called it the blood of Adam. Not physical blood, but a hidden code, a living spark of Sophia herself. A fragment of the divine hidden within each soul, waiting for the moment to awaken. Today, you will discover why this code was hidden, and what happens when it finally awakens within you. What if there was something inside you that science has never fully explained? Something that no religion has been able to completely translate, and that perhaps you have already felt without understanding where it came from. A silent force, a kind of ancient memory that seems to awaken at certain moments in life, as if a forgotten truth were trying to resurface. Have you ever felt this? Today, we will delve into one of the deepest mysteries of ancient spirituality, the enigma of the blood of Adam. But not physical blood, not flesh, not the body, but rather the spiritual code which, according to gnostic and apocryphal traditions, carries the divine spark left by Sophia within humanity. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover could completely reshape how you understand Eden, creation, and even your own spiritual journey. For centuries, we've been taught that Adam was merely the first man, a primordial figure at the beginning of human history. But what if he wasn't the first man, but rather the first awakened? What if what we call blood was actually an ancient metaphor for something much deeper? A kind of spiritual DNA, a code of consciousness, a fragment of the very divine light that Sophia breathed into humanity. Think about that for a moment. How many times have you felt an intuition too strong to ignore? An inner calling that seemed to come from somewhere you couldn't explain? How many times have you realized that there is something in you that simply doesn't fit into the material world as it is? This kind of feeling, according to many Gnostic texts, is the echo of Sophia's spark, still alive. And when you start looking at Eden from that perspective, not as a physical event, but as a symbol of awakening, everything changes. The story ceases to be about a literal garden and tree, and becomes about consciousness, about divine memory, about the human search for something it has always sensed. The spiritual origin that has never been completely erased. And perhaps that is why so many people, when they hear this type of narrative, feel something familiar, as if they had known this before. Do you feel this too? If so, don't ignore it. It may be precisely this spiritual code moving within you. The blood of Adam, interpreted as this hidden code of creation, appears in various ancient manuscripts as a key. The key that made Adam different from all other beings formed before him. Not physically different, but different. Internally, it was as if he carried within him a sign, a divine imprint that the archons could not control. A reminder of true origin, a spark of consciousness that would later become the trigger for the entire human spiritual journey. And when Sophia infuses this light into creation, she creates not just a living being. She creates a being capable of remembering, capable of awakening, capable of questioning. What if I told you that that same spark, that same code, is still present within you today? That none of it has disappeared, that none of it is lost? It has simply fallen asleep, waiting for the right moment to be recognized again. Perhaps that's why you're here now, listening to this message. Perhaps it's not by chance. But before we understand how this spark works within you, we need to go back to the beginning, to the exact moment this code was first placed, and to the reason why it was so carefully hidden throughout the centuries. That's where the story really begins to unfold. And as you absorb all of this, perhaps you've already felt some inner movement, a kind of silent recognition, almost as if a forgotten part of you is trying to awaken. Many people report exactly this feeling when they come into contact with the idea of Sophia's spark and Adam's blood as a spiritual code. And I would be very curious to know if this also happens to you. If this subject makes sense to you, leave a comment below about what touched you most, what you felt, or even what questions arose. This space isn't just mine, it's ours. And each comment creates a kind of living web, where other people who are seeking the same answers find support, identification, and new paths. And since you're here with me, diving so deeply into this topic, I ask you something simple but very important, like the video. It seems like a small gesture, but it makes a huge difference. When you click like, YouTube understands that this type of content has value and starts delivering it to other people who are also seeking spiritual answers and hidden meanings. It's almost as if you're helping this message travel further, reach more consciousnesses, touch more stories. And if you feel that this journey is for you, that this topic resonates in some way, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any episodes, any revelations, any further steps on this path we're building together. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of knowledge that, for so long, has remained hidden. And while you do that, turn your attention to something very important. If there is a code within you, a living spark that has traversed ages, then understanding how it was placed in Adam, and why, is essential to understanding what is happening within you now. Because the story doesn't end in Eden, it only began there. And the next step takes us directly to the moment when this code was shaped, sealed, and hidden within humanity. Let's continue. From the beginning, when ancient texts speak of the creation of Adam, we almost always imagine something physical. A body molded from clay, a human form coming to life as in a primordial ritual. But if you carefully observe the subtext of these narratives, not only the canonical ones, but especially the gnostic and apocryphal ones, you realize that the story is much deeper than a material creation. It actually describes a process of infusion of consciousness, as if the body were merely a vessel, while the true purpose lay in what was placed within it. This is where the mystery takes on another dimension. Because when we speak of Adam's breath, light, and blood, we are not talking about physical elements, but about ancient symbols to describe the transfer of something far more valuable: divine memory, awakened consciousness, spiritual identity. And it's interesting how this perspective alters the way we understand our own existence. If Adam was first molded as matter, as many Gnostic texts claim, where the archons form him only as an empty body, then it was Sophia who completed the process, depositing in him that which truly mattered. This means that, from the beginning, humanity carries an internal conflict between physical structure and spiritual essence, between what was molded and what was infused. This duality is a key that many spiritual seekers intuitively perceive throughout their lives. The feeling of not fully belonging to the material world, the silent discomfort in the face of simplistic explanations, the search for something beyond the surface. All of this can be a reflection of this dormant code. When the texts mention the breath of life, they are not merely describing oxygen entering the lungs, but the instant when a higher consciousness touches what was previously just a vessel. This breath is a metaphor for that which activates the hidden code, the spark. And when the image of light appears, it functions as an indication of the origin of this consciousness. Light is what breaks through the darkness of ignorance, what differentiates a living being from an awakened being, what separates automatic movement from true perception. In many traditions, this light is called gnosis, insight, inner revelation. In others, it is seen as a trace of the invisible world that attempts to emerge into matter. But perhaps the most intriguing symbol is blood. And it's not hard to understand why. Blood has always been represented as a bearer of life, identity, heritage. However, in the case of Adam, it symbolizes something even deeper: the transmission of divine memory, the link between Sophia and humanity, proof that human life did not begin as a simple biological act, but as a movement of spiritual transmission. This symbolic blood carries that which awakens intuition, existential curiosity, the capacity to question. It functions as a kind of spiritual chip, a fragment of knowledge embedded in the human being from the beginning. And perhaps that's why so many people, even without fully understanding these stories, feel that something within them is trying to emerge, as if the soul has been programmed to seek answers that the world doesn't readily offer. It's as if the very human structure is built to awaken, sooner or later. Science speaks of instincts, neurological patterns, advanced brain functions. But ancient spirituality speaks of memory. A memory that doesn't come from childhood, nor from physical genetics, but from a much older origin. The memory of the original light. Now, when we observe the Gnostic narrative about the archons shaping Adam's body, we perceive a powerful metaphor about the material world. The idea that the external form is limited, imperfect, even manipulated. But that the inner spark, that which Sophia placed within, is incorruptible. This creates an existential tension that has accompanied humanity from the beginning. It's as if we were a kind of passage between two worlds. The world of matter that imprisons us and the world of consciousness that tries to liberate us. This duality explains both our capacity to build and our tendency towards doubt, both our power and our emotional fragility. When someone feels the need to find meaning, transform their mindset, look beyond immediate reality, or when they feel that certain decisions carry a weight that transcends the everyday, perhaps it is precisely this silent code at work. It manifests itself in intuition that arises out of nowhere, in the sensation of déjà vu, in symbolic dreams, in the unease that appears in the face of a hidden truth, or even in the emotional impact we feel when something touches that inner point that has never been rationally explained. And what's most impressive is that, for the ancients, this code wasn't seen as something static. It's alive. It pulsates. It expands as consciousness opens. It responds when a person approaches their spiritual origin. It's as if there's an invisible backstage where this memory rests, waiting only for the individual to open up and reveal itself. And this means that the human journey, all the searches, mistakes, learnings, crises, discoveries, is not merely emotional or psychological, but part of the process of activating this code that Adam received. Now that we're navigating these layers of creation and consciousness, it's worth understanding how this code came to influence not only Adam, but all of humanity that came after. Because the transmission of this spark didn't just happen at the beginning. It continues to reverberate to this day, guiding, calling, awakening. And it is here that the story begins to gain even greater depth. Before continuing, comment below. This light makes sense to me, or any phrase that describes what you've felt so far. I want to know how this theme resonated with you as we continue to advance on this journey. Since we began discussing the hidden code within Adam, something has become evident. This inner force, this spiritual spark, was not limited to a single being. It spread, branched out, multiplied, not as a biological trait, but as an invisible inheritance that shapes the human journey to this day. Various traditions around the world speak of a golden thread connecting all souls, as if each person carried a fragment of the same primordial light. The Gnostics called this the divine lineage, Jewish mystics spoke of the blood of light, and some spiritual schools describe this connection as an energy field that transcends space and time. Regardless of the name each culture gave it, the essence is the same. There is a spiritual DNA shared by all humanity. And the most curious thing is that when you begin to observe human behavior with this idea in mind, many things take on new meaning. After all, why do people from completely different cultures have similar intuitions, dreams with universal symbols, or spiritual experiences that seem to follow an invisible pattern? Perhaps because, at some deep level, we are all made of the same sacred substance. Not just flesh, bone, and instinct, but a trace of primordial consciousness that, fragmented, lives within every human being. This idea completely transforms the way we see life. It suggests that no soul is isolated, and that there is a level of unity that goes beyond appearances and beyond external differences. Some people describe this feeling of unity as an ancient memory, something that reveals itself in moments of silence, meditation, or even in times of crisis, when a person feels the need to make profound decisions that could change their own trajectory. In these moments, it's as if this spiritual DNA manifests itself, guiding the individual towards something greater than rationality itself can explain. Many call this the inner voice. Others call it intuition, but perhaps it is simply the memory of who we were before the fragmentation. And this fragmentation is a crucial point. Gnosticism affirms that humanity's original consciousness was one, an indivisible, full, luminous field. When the spark was scattered, individualities, unique experiences, and particular paths emerged. But, fundamentally, everything still belongs to the same source. It's as if each person were a flame that ignited from a primordial bonfire, separated at first glance, but made of the same fire. This explains why certain spiritual themes resonate so intensely with people who have never met, never studied together, never shared similar beliefs. When you touch this layer of existence, you touch something universal. And that is precisely what ancient traditions have tried to preserve with terms like symbolic blood, spiritual lineage, or golden thread. These are not literal references. but poetic ways of explaining that there is a hidden truth behind the human experience. A truth that, when understood, completely transforms a person's mindset and changes the way they walk through life. Because if we all carry the same spark, then we are all deeply connected, even when we don't realize it. But this connection isn't always awake. In many people, it remains dormant, covered by layers of fear, distractions, conditioning, and painful experiences. Modern life, with its speed, pressures, and superficiality, tends to stifle this spiritual memory. And yet, it insists on manifesting itself. Sometimes it appears as a restlessness that the person can't explain. Other times it arises as a call to seek a purpose. In some cases, it manifests through symbolic dreams that seem to carry hidden messages. And there are also those who awaken through moments of emotional impact, those that mark an internal turning point. Whatever form it takes, awakening happens when this spiritual DNA begins to vibrate again, reminding the person of their origin, their strength, and their connection to the whole. This doesn't mean abandoning material life, but seeing it from a new angle, as part of a much larger journey. A journey that doesn't begin with birth and doesn't end with death. A journey that continues through memories, intuitions, inner revelations, and the human capacity to create meaning even in the darkest situations. It's interesting to note how science already recognizes that all human beings share a large part of their biological DNA. But what spiritual traditions say goes further. They affirm that we also share a non-material DNA, something that carries values, symbols, profound truths, and an inner calling that shapes us much more than we imagine. This explains why so many people feel that there is a greater purpose, even when they cannot define it. It's as if a part of them already knows something that the mind has not yet grasped. And when you understand that this golden thread is present within you, you begin to see your own life with different eyes. You begin to realize that each challenge is a stage of awakening. Each encounter has a hidden meaning. Each deep emotion is a reminder of your essence. From that point on, the human journey ceases to be merely survival and becomes a process of remembrance. Remembrance of the common origin, of the divine lineage, of the blood of light that symbolically runs through us all. Now, I want to delve into another layer of this mystery, something even more subtle and transformative, because understanding this spiritual connection is only the beginning. There's an even deeper level to this invisible lineage that helps explain why certain encounters change everything, why some people awaken before others, and why humanity always seems to be searching for something it can't name. Before we move on, leave a simple comment below, just to register your presence on this journey. I feel this connection, or any word that describes what has awakened in you so far. From here, everything starts to make even more sense. When we speak of Adam as the first human being, we almost always imagine a solitary figure emerging in the middle of a perfect garden. But when we observe this story through a gnostic lens, which interprets everything as spiritual symbols and not as literal events, we realize that the true central point is not the creation of the body, but rather the instant of the awakening of consciousness. This moment is much deeper than a simple blink of an eye. It is the instant in which Adam perceives himself for the first time, as someone who exists, who feels, who questions. And this perception does not happen automatically. It is the point of impact between the divine spark and matter, between the spiritual code and the physical world. Imagine for a second what it would be like to become aware of oneself without previous references. No childhood, no memories, no culture, no language. Only the raw perception of existence. This moment describes the birth of human self-awareness, something that, according to Gnosticism, was not completed by the archons who molded the body, but by the spark of Sophia that infused the primordial light within it. Thus, Adam does not awaken because his body is alive, but because his soul ignites. And it is this soul, this fire, this code, this divine memory, that begins the journey we all still travel. Gnostic texts portray Adam as a hybrid being, matter shaped by inferior powers and spirit emanating from the higher source. This combination creates an internal conflict from the beginning. On the one hand, he perceives the physical world around him, its limitations, its structure. On the other, he feels something that cannot be explained by forms, names, or boundaries. It is as if he carries a hidden truth within himself, but does not yet know how to decode it. This is the initial state of human consciousness, the desire to understand something that does not yet have a language to express. And it is precisely at this point that the symbolic blood of Adam gains meaning. It is not a physical fluid, but a representation of the energy that circulates within the human being when he begins to perceive that there is something beyond mere survival. It is the moment when the individual asks himself, "Who am I? Why am I here? What lies beyond what I can touch?" In other words, the awakening of self-knowledge. You have probably felt this at some point, that restlessness that arises out of nowhere, that feeling that your life is not limited to external circumstances. These questions are echoes of the same awakening that Adam experienced. But the Gnostic awakening is not complete with this initial perception. It only intensifies when Adam comes into contact with forbidden knowledge, which is nothing more than the expansion of consciousness. Not a literal act of disobedience, but the breaking down of mental barriers imposed by the archons, by the illusions of the material world, by the limitations of the body. When Adam approaches the tree of knowledge, guided by the inner calling, he represents the human being who seeks to see beyond the surface, who decides not to live merely reacting, but understanding. And this decision, according to Gnosticism, changes everything. Because by accessing knowledge, Adam awakens not only to himself, but to the structure of the world. He realizes that he lives in a larger scenario, that there is a duality between body and soul, between material illusion and spiritual reality. This is the beginning of the journey that we all undertake at some point in life. The search for purpose, the questioning of existence, the interest in spirituality, the perception of patterns, synchronicities, signs. All of this is a reflection of the same inner expansion that Adam experienced. And the most fascinating thing is realizing that this process isn't limited to a mythical context. It happens daily to millions of people. That moment when you feel you need to change your mindset, rethink your choices, make new decisions aligned with something deeper. That's the symbolic blood pulsing. It's the internal code calling you to transformation. It's the spark wanting to express itself. The search for inner truth never begins from the outside. It begins when something inside you awakens and whispers, "There is more, much more." Think about the times you felt you were living on autopilot, and suddenly something made you stop and question everything. Maybe a crisis, maybe an unexpected encounter, maybe an insight that came out of nowhere. These moments aren't random. They are small activations. They are turning points. They are fragments of the same journey that Adam began when he awakened. Human consciousness is built like this. Little by little, in layers, through internal revelations that no one can force and that only appear when you are ready to perceive them. And when you understand Adam as the first awakened one, everything changes. He ceases to be a distant figure and becomes a mirror, a symbol of what you also experience, the transition between ignorance and understanding, between the unknown and revelation. Adam represents the human being who begins to see their own interior, who realizes that life is more than external events, who understands that there is an internal movement asking for space to expand. This movement is the symbolic blood flowing. It is the code of the soul activating. It is the spiritual journey of each person taking shape. And when you look at this story in this way, you realize that Adam was never alone. Because the awakening that began in him is the same one that continues in you now. There is a direct line between that first instant of awareness and your own moments of inner lucidity. It's as if all souls are connected by the same narrative, a narrative that crosses eras, cultures, and bodies, but never loses its essence. I want to take you even deeper into this awakening, because there's a dimension to this story that speaks directly to what we feel when we awaken to our inner world. Before we continue, leave a comment with a word that describes what this awakened in you. Something simple like, "I am awakening," or another term that translates your feeling. And let's continue advancing along the same path of consciousness that Adam initiated. Before Adam awakened to himself, to that consciousness that breaks through the inner darkness and ignites the search for hidden truth, something was already silently stirring in the spiritual background of creation. Because, contrary to what the most popular version of the story suggests, the awakening was not an isolated event, much less an experience exclusive to a single being. From the beginning, there have been voices, presences, and energies that walk side by side on the human journey. And two of them are fundamental to understanding what was really happening in that symbolic setting called Eden: Lilith and Eve. When you look at these figures with an open mind, something profound happens, because you realize that they represent different, but complementary, forces within human consciousness. Lilith emerges as a kind of brute force of the soul, something that does not bend, that does not accept imprisonment, that does not recognize hierarchy when it comes to inner truth. Gnostic tradition and some ancient interpretations describe her as the first to understand the divine code within herself, the first to feel that that light was not something to be controlled or domesticated. This is why she receives the symbolic title of bearer of the wild flame. Wild not in a destructive sense, but in the sense of spiritual freedom, of the inner impulse that makes us question systems, structures, beliefs, and pre-established narratives. Lilith is the part of human consciousness that refuses to live automatically, the part that feels the influence of the golden thread and awakens even before being taught. On the other hand, we have Eve, not as a submissive figure, as many traditions have tried to portray her, but as the catalyst for a completely different kind of awakening. Eve represents that energy of the soul that doesn't just want to awaken alone, but desires to share, expand, and multiply understanding. She is not the cause of the fall, but the turning point of collective consciousness. When she touches the fruit, when she decides to experience knowledge, she is symbolically making a decision that would transform not only her own journey, but that of all humanity. She is the impact that generates movement. It is the moment when the human being stops observing and begins to participate. It is the instant when the inner light ceases to be information and becomes a choice. Notice how Lilith and Eve form a fascinating contrast. Lilith awakens first, alone, through the force of rebellious intuition. Eve awakens later, but brings with her the awareness of unity, of sharing, of the collective. And Adam, in interacting with both, whether in literal myth or psychological symbolism, is exposed to two dimensions of his own soul: the wild and the integrative. It is here that symbolic blood begins to circulate fully, because human consciousness only becomes complete when these polarities manage to coexist. And if you look at yourself honestly, you might realize how these archetypes manifest in your own life. There are times when you feel like Lilith, guided by an inner force that doesn't accept imposed limitations, that wants to take a step further, that feels there's a greater truth waiting to be discovered. And there are times when you feel like Eve, seeking connection, wanting to share the transformation, wishing that others would awaken along with you. These two movements exist within every soul that is in the process of expansion. They don't compete, they complement each other. It's interesting to note how many traditions have tried to hide the spiritual power of these female figures. Perhaps because they represent something that cannot be controlled: awakened consciousness. Lilith is the courage to break free from what imprisons. Eve is the courage to transform what exists. And Adam is the one who, upon coming into contact with these two forces, finally accesses the totality of human experience. This is why the story of Eden ceases to be merely a narrative about error or fall, and becomes a metaphor for the birth of shared consciousness, about the moment when humanity begins to understand that it is not here merely to exist, but to remember who it is. When Eve takes the step toward knowledge, she is not being deceived. She is answering the inner call that Lilith had already answered before her. And that call echoes to this day. It appears in our deepest decisions, when we feel the need to leave a state of emotional or spiritual ignorance and walk toward understanding. It appears when we realize that our journey is not just individual, but part of something greater. It appears when we understand that we are not separate from other beings, but connected by that same symbolic blood that comes from the beginning. And perhaps that's why the figure of Lilith has such an impact. She represents the initial flame. And Eve, in turn, represents the spreading of that flame. Together, they form the movement that awakens humanity as a whole. They are living reminders that the awakening process doesn't happen linearly. It happens in waves. The soul awakens in layers, in fragments, through revelations that emerge at the right time. And each person, consciously or not, carries this inner dance between the wild impulse and the search for connection. It's almost as if the story of Eden were, in fact, the inner story of each of us. A journey that begins in silence, passes through discovery, confronts conflict, and finally finds a deeper meaning. And when you see Lilith and Eve not as external characters, but as expressions of the soul itself, everything transforms. You begin to realize that these archetypes haven't died. They are alive, changing mindsets, influencing decisions, illuminating paths. I want to open up another layer of this story because there's an even deeper part to how these forces intertwine and shape everything we understand as spiritual awakening. But before we continue, leave a simple phrase in the comments like, "I feel the flame alive," or any expression that represents what these figures have awakened in you so far. This helps to record what you are perceiving as we continue on this journey together. From the moment this spiritual code was placed within humanity, this symbolic blood, this living memory that traverses bodies and eras, something began to happen in the invisible backstage of existence. A kind of silent struggle, a permanent tension between remembering and forgetting. And when you observe this deeply, you realize that this conflict is not just part of Gnostic mythology. It is part of the real human experience. From the first generations to the present day, there is a force within us that tries to awaken us, and another, external and silent, that tries to keep us asleep. This is the war between memory and forgetting. A war not fought with physical weapons, but with distractions, illusions, distorted beliefs, fear, and manipulation of material reality. The Gnostics called these forces archons, beings that don't necessarily need to be seen as physical creatures, but as agents of limitation. They represent everything that tries to imprison human consciousness in the most superficial layer of existence. The archons are the symbol of the material world manipulating the mind, shaping behaviors, creating routines that distance the individual from themselves. In the symbolic narrative, they are the ones who try to erase the divine memory deposited by Sophia, keeping humankind trapped in ignorance, automatism, and the cycle of repetition. And it's not difficult to see how this manifests today. The speed of daily life, social demands, dependence on external validation, the feeling of emptiness even in the face of material achievements. All these experiences can be understood as layers that cover this spark. But despite all this, the divine blood never disappeared. It resists. It pulsates. It tries all the time to reconnect you to your origin. And that's where the phenomena occur that many people describe as sudden intuitions, premonitions, meaningful dreams, synchronicities that seem to reveal a hidden pattern, or that unique moment when something inside you simply awakens without explanation. This inner strength is memory trying to emerge. It appears when you question something that most people accept without thinking. It arises when you feel that a profound truth is hidden behind appearances. It manifests when you face a moment of crisis and, instead of crumbling, discover a strength you didn't even know you possessed. According to the Gnostic view, forgetfulness is not merely a lack of information. It is a strategy of spiritual imprisonment. Not a prison with walls and bars, but a mental state that prevents human beings from perceiving their own origin. When a person lives only on autopilot, reacting without thinking, desiring without understanding, accepting without questioning, they are imprisoned. And this imprisonment is so subtle that many spend their entire lives without realizing they are shackled. The material world awakens fascination, but at the same time creates a fog that envelopes consciousness. This fog is made up of constant distractions, repetitive emotional patterns, beliefs that limit human potential, and the feeling that we are alone, disconnected, without a greater purpose. But symbolic blood, this spiritual code, functions precisely as a rupture in this fog. It doesn't allow itself to be completely silenced. At some point in the journey, it always finds a way to manifest itself. Sometimes it appears in small moments, an unexplained shiver, a profound insight amidst the silence, the feeling that something is calling you to a different, truer path. Other times, it appears as a dramatic push, a situation that forces you to break old patterns and awaken to a new mindset. These moments are not coincidence. They are part of the natural functioning of the code. It's as if Sophia's spark is constantly sending reminders to the soul not to forget who it truly is. And it's interesting to realize that the more a person resists their own awakening, the more forgetfulness intensifies. The mind begins to absorb distractions as if they were necessities. Routine becomes a labyrinth. External life takes up all the space, and internal life is compressed, pushed into a corner. Even so, the symbolic blood never goes out. It may become silent, dormant, weakened, but it never disappears. And when a person reaches their emotional or existential limit, that moment when they realize something needs to change, the code activates with even greater force. That's when synchronicities begin. Unexpected encounters, phrases that touch deeply, content that arrives by chance, situations that seem to have been placed in their path on purpose. Synchronicity is the language of awakening. Now let's consider something important. If there are external forces trying to keep humanity asleep, they do so not because human beings are weak, but because awakened consciousness is too powerful. An awakened person questions, creates, transforms. They perceive patterns, understand their own mind, perceive manipulations, and don't fall so easily for social illusions. They make decisions with clarity, not fear. They recognize when they are being guided by something superficial and when they are listening to their inner truth. And someone who lives like this is not easily controlled. That's why, since the earliest civilizations, there have always been attempts to restrict human consciousness, whether through religion, politics, culture, ignorance, or even distorted spiritual narratives. Symbolic blood, therefore, is not just a beautiful metaphor. It is the thread that pulls consciousness back home. It is divine memory fighting against oblivion. It is the spark that insists on shining, even when everything around tries to extinguish that light. And when a person finally recognizes this inner movement, when they understand that their deepest impulses are not delusions, but memories, then the transformation begins. A transformation that is not theoretical, but practical. That changes behaviors, perceptions, choices, cycles. That opens space for a new understanding of one's own existence. I want to delve even deeper into this invisible war between light and oblivion, because there's a point in the journey where it all connects to something much bigger than we imagine. But before we continue, leave a simple word in the comments that translates what this theme evokes in you. Something like "I remember," or any other phrase that represents the inner movement you felt just now. This helps to register your presence as we continue exploring this path. From the beginning of this journey, one thing became increasingly clear. Everything we call myth, symbol, metaphor, or ancient scripture isn't just talking about the past, it's talking about you. About your inner self. About your consciousness. About your silent journey towards something you've always felt, but perhaps never knew how to explain in words. And when we reach this point in the narrative, when we talk about the call to awakening, the symbolic blood of Adam ceases to be merely a spiritual concept and becomes a mirror that reveals who you truly are inside. Because according to the Gnostic vision and so many other ancient traditions, the same divine spark that ignited Adam's consciousness continues to live within every human being, waiting to be recognized again. And here lies something profoundly transformative. Awakening is not a dramatic, grandiose, or cinematic event as many people imagine. It begins subtly. It begins when you feel that there is something more. When you realize that routine leaves questions unanswered. When certain situations cease to make sense. When you begin to notice patterns in your experiences, as if the universe were trying to send you hidden messages. It's that moment when a person looks in the mirror and realizes that who they are inside no longer fits into the life they are living on the outside. It is the soul calling for a reunion with its own inner light. This calling manifests itself differently for each person. For some, it comes through a difficult moment, a loss, a rupture, a forced change. For others, it arises as a sudden longing, a desire to seek knowledge, to meditate, to understand spirituality, to question what has always been accepted as absolute truth. And there are those who feel this calling in the form of a constant intuition, as if something within them whispers, "You are not living all that you came to live." Regardless of the form, the origin is the same. The code deposited within the soul, that same code that ignited Adam, beginning to vibrate again. And do you realize how this completely changes the way you see your own story? Awakening isn't about learning something new, but about remembering what has been forgotten. That's why, when someone awakens, they feel a strange familiarity, as if they were rediscovering something that was always there. It's as if the soul is saying, finally. Everything falls into place because the truth doesn't come from outside, it emerges from within. You're not borrowing something. You're reclaiming something that was already yours from the beginning. This return to consciousness is precisely what so many traditions have tried to preserve throughout the centuries, even if in a symbolic, veiled, or fragmented way. Eden was not just a place. It was a state of being, an experience of full connection between the soul and the source. And when the narrative speaks of the fall, it is not talking about literal sin, but about the loss of spiritual memory, disconnection, forgetfulness, a life lived only halfway. The symbolic blood, on the other hand, is the thread that pulls us back. It is proof that the journey did not end in Eden, it began there. And it is this same thread that appears in moments when you feel an inexplicable intuition, a need to change your mindset, a sudden desire to abandon habits that no longer make sense, or an impulse to seek your own truth. These internal movements don't arise by chance. They are part of the activation process of the spiritual code. It is the spark of Sophia finding space to emerge again. And when it begins to manifest, everything within you begins to reorganize itself. Thoughts, priorities, emotions, choices. It's as if life gains a new depth. You begin to see not only what happens, but what exists behind what happens. And perhaps you've already felt this in some way. That moment when, even without rationally understanding it, you know you're changing, that you're awakening, that you're returning to yourself. And this is one of the strongest signs that symbolic blood is active. It acts as a constant reminder that you are not just body, routine, social function. You are consciousness, light, purpose. You are part of something much bigger. A journey that began before you were born and continues even after your earthly story ends. And here's something important. Awakening doesn't mean becoming perfect, enlightened, or superior. Awakening means perceiving. It means remembering. It means making decisions aligned with what is true, not just what is comfortable. It means recognizing that there is a force within you that has always known the way. And when you allow that force to guide your life, your journey is profoundly transformed. You begin to see meaning where before you only saw chaos, purpose where before you only saw pain, and truth where before you only saw doubt. And all this that we're talking about now isn't about belief, it's about inner recognition. True spirituality isn't something you adopt, it's something you discover. It's not something that comes from the outside. It's something that awakens from within. And when the spark ignites, you feel it. You know, you understand, even if you can't yet explain it. I want to take you to the next level of this understanding, because there's an essential point about how this inner light begins to consciously shape your life and guide your journey. But before we continue, write a simple sentence in the comments that translates what you've felt so far. It could be, I awaken from within, or any expression that represents this inner movement that the symbolic blood provokes in you. From here, everything begins to gain even more depth. And if you've made it this far with me, it's because some part of this message has truly resonated with you. That already says a lot about your journey, about your openness, about the inner movement that's happening inside you, even if silently. And truly, that makes me happy, because it's precisely for people like you that this kind of content exists. So let me ask you something in a very natural way. If this video helped you see something differently, if it touched on an important point, if it opened up a new perspective, subscribe to the channel. This way you won't miss the next chapters of this journey, and I can continue bringing you content that accompanies your awakening process with depth, respect, and awareness. Your subscription makes a difference because it shows that this type of conversation deserves to continue. And if you've made it to the end, leave a comment with the phrase, "That light continues within me." It's just so I know you completed this journey with me until the very last second. I read everything, and it helps me feel who is truly walking alongside me. If you'd like to leave a like, do it now. It's not just a button. It strengthens the connection we've created here and helps this content reach other people who might need the same message. And before you go, there's a video over here that perfectly complements what we talked about today. Click and stay with me there. The next piece of this story might be exactly what you were hoping to hear.